In gardens all over the world, there's this invisible workforce, and it's on the brink of collapse. There are pollinators, and they are absolutely essential to our world. In this explainer, we're going to dig into why that small patch of earth you call a garden might just be one of their last best hopes for survival. Okay, let's start with a number that's, well, it's pretty staggering. 85%. That's how many of the world's flowering plants depend on animal pollinators to reproduce. I mean, can you even imagine a world with 85% fewer flowers, fruits, and seeds? Because honestly, that's the direction we're heading without them. And then there's this number, one that hits a lot closer to your kitchen table. $235 billion. That's the value every single year of the crops that rely on these guys. We're talking about, everything from your morning coffee to your apples, almonds, even chocolate. They are literally the invisible foundation of our entire food system. So what's the common thread here? What links our ecosystems, our food, and our economy? Well, it's this incredibly crucial and, as we're about to find out, really threatened group, our pollinators. We're talking bees, butterflies, moths, you name it. They're the engine that makes so much of our world go round. But that engine is really starting to sputter. So in this first part, let's get a real handle on just how bad the problem has gotten. And look, this isn't just some guess. A huge survey brought back a pretty shocking statistic. Over 1 in 5 of our native North American pollinators are now at a high risk of extinction. Think about that for a second. For every 5 different pollinators you might see, imagine one of them just gone. That's the reality we're dealing with. And what's really interesting is when you start to break it down, just look at the native bees. We're seeing nearly 35% at risk. That's more than a third of all native bee species. It makes them, hands down, the most endangered group of insects they looked at. And if we zoom in even closer, the picture gets even clearer and, frankly, a little scarier. Leafcutter bees, almost half of their species are at risk. Digger bees and the bumblebees we all know and love, they're not doing much better. These aren't just stats on a page, This represents a massive breakdown in how our ecosystems are supposed to work. Okay, so to really bring this home, let's talk about an icon, the monarch butterfly. Its story is just a perfect and heartbreaking example of how fragile these whole systems really are. Up to an 80% decline. That's not just a drop. That's a catastrophic crash for one of the most recognizable insects on the entire planet. It's a 5-alarm fire for conservationists, and it should be a huge warning sign for all of us. So you gotta ask why. What makes him so vulnerable? Well, it really boils down to one simple thing. The monarch is a specialist. It has this absolute dependency on a single type of plant. Females will only lay their eggs on milkweed, and the caterpillars that hatch will only eat milkweed. No milkweed, no monarchs. It's that simple. But here's where it gets a little tricky. A lot of well-meaning gardeners, right? They go out and plant tropical milkweed because it's easy to find at the big box stores. The problem is this non-native plant doesn't die back in the winter in warmer places, and that does 2 really bad things. It messes with the monarch's migration signals, and even worse, it lets a really nasty parasite build up all over its leaf. Yeah, this parasite is called OE for short, and it is an absolute nightmare for monarchs. The caterpillars eat the spores on the leaves, and the parasite just takes over from the inside. The results are just devastating. We're talking deformed wings, a much shorter life, and no way they can make that incredible migration down to Mexico. In fact, on tropical milkweed, the infection rates can get as high as 49%, almost a coin flip. Okay, so that's a lot of bad news, but let's pivot. Let's talk solutions. And the very first step is to realize that creating a real habitat is about way more than just planting pretty flowers. We have to start with the foundation, the one thing everyone overlooks, a place for them to live. Now, this right here might be the most surprising thing you learned today. I know it was for me. When you think bee, you probably picture a hive, right? Well, almost all of our 3,600 plus native bee species are actually solitary. And get this is what totally changed how I look at my own garden. A full 70% of them nest in the ground. So how do we help that massive majority? It's actually more about what you stop doing. Just leave some patches of bare, sunny soil. Ditch that thick wood mulch. It's like paving over their homes. And use compost instead. And for the love of all that is holy, stop tilling your garden beds. You could be digging up and destroying entire nurseries of next year's bees.
Okay, so what about the other 30%, the ones that nest in cavities? The solution is pretty similar, just be a little less tidy. Dead wood isn't an eyesore, it's a bee apartment building. Those pithy stems from old raspberry canes, perfect little bee tunnels. And here's a brilliant pro tip. In the spring, instead of cutting your old flower stalks all the way down, chop them at different heights, anywhere from 8 to 24 inches. Boom, you've just created dozens of five-star nesting sites.
All right, so we've built the houses. Now it's time to stock the pantry. In this next part, we're going to focus on the food because it's not just about planting any flower. It's about being smart and choosing the right plants for the biggest possible impact. This right here is probably the single most important rule of pollinator gardening. Research has shown that native plants are 4 times more attractive to native bees. It just makes sense, right? They've evolved together for thousands of years. They speak the same language. But you've got to be a savvy shopper at the nursery. You're going to see a ton of what are called nativars. These are native plants that have been bred for certain traits that we think look pretty. The problem? Those traits can be ecological traps. Those cool purple leaves, they're often full of chemicals that insects can't eat. And those fluffy double flowers, they've been bred with so many petals that the bees and butterflies literally can't get to the pollen and nectar. Okay, here's a really cool concept that ties it all together. It's called soft landings. It's all about the space under your trees. See, a lot of moth and butterfly caterpillars munch on leaves way up in a big tree, like an oak. When they're ready to become a chrysalis or cocoon, they just drop. If they land on a hard-packed lawn, they're toast. But a soft landing, a nice layer of leaf litter and some native plants underneath, gives them the shelter they desperately need to finish their life cycle. All right, let's bring all this home. We're going to wrap up with one final, super critical piece of advice that you can put into action right away. This one might be the single most important habit you can change in your garden. It's called the 50-degree rule. You know that urge you get on the very first warm day of spring to go out and clean everything up? Well, that can be a total death sentence for all the pollinators that are still sleeping in those old stems and leaf litter. The best thing you can do is just wait. Seriously, wait until the daytime temperatures are consistently over 50 degrees Fahrenheit, that's 10 Celsius, for about a week. Let them wake up and leave on their own schedule. So when it all comes down to it, it's really this. Your garden, it doesn't matter how big or small it is. It's not just a collection of your favorite plants. It's a real functioning ecosystem. It's a home, it's a grocery store, and it's a nursery. The only question left is, what are you going to choose to grow?